All right, guys. Well, for those of you that can hear me, we're going to wait just a few more minutes to see if we can't give a few more people time to show up. But I'm about to enable the Q&A feature, I hope. So if that works, please feel free to shoot out any topics that you want to see covered, and I'll make sure and hit those. Be back again in about 2 minutes. All right, guys. I think we're going to go ahead and start. Looks like we got a few people. If you manage to get the chat working on the right, or you'll need to kind of click the screen and move your cursor to the left if you're accessing this through Google Hangouts, or in YouTube, you may be able to use comments. But if you don't find a way to get in touch this way, go ahead and send a tweet via Twitter, and I'll take a look before the end of this as well. So in the meantime, I just kind of wanted to introduce those of you that aren't familiar with 0.10 of Sails with a little bit of what's coming out this Friday. August 1st is our planned release, which has been a long time coming. But there's a lot to cover, so what I can do is start from the very top, and I'll kind of delve in deeper into the core unless I get other questions. Thanks all of you for coming. All right, so there is one of the best things about version 0.10, I think, right now is obviously associations. But second to that, there's a new website that we've had some help from the community, as well as Heather and Mike doing design and Rachel taking care of the front end. That is a complete revamp of our docs. So it's currently up on beta.sails.js.org. A lot of you have probably already been using it, or at least checking it out. Nick, also known as Uncle Tammy on GitHub, has also added annotations to the original screencasts. So hopefully folks seeing Sails for the first time won't be completely confused about what's going on, since that's from, I think, about 0.8. So yeah, I guess before we dive into the features themselves, definitely encourage you to check out the docs. We could definitely use more tutorials, but these are a good kind of standard coverage of as much as possible. There's still a lot of room to grow here, but I think as far as up-to-date coverage of the actual code base, there's, especially under reference, we kind of have now this superset of what's in the Express documentation, as well as the methods that Sails adds to the request and also the response object, a deeper explanation of configuration, waterline model methods, as well as resourceful pub/sub methods, and the low-level socket methods, and the Sails socket client under WebSockets here. Under Blueprint API, this is still a work in progress, but basically this is sort of what you'd expect to see from a web service or a web API of what an API would expose. So ideally you can take this and feed it to someone who hasn't really worked with Sails, and they'll be able to use blueprints if you're scaffolding something up. All right. So also, encourage you to check out Anatomy. This is the structure of a Sails app, which has changed a little bit since 0.9. Again, most of you have probably already looked at it, but one of the biggest changes is the addition of this tasks folder, which basically we took the grub file and broke it up into individual files so that there's these new things called generators can replace, override, or omit certain files depending on what your preferences are. So if you never use JST, or if you don't use less and you use SAS instead, the idea here is that since they're these atomic files, you can mix and match that stuff and make it part of your build process. Okay, so I will, unless there's any other questions, and I'll check Twitter really quick. I don't think anyone has been able to post in the chat, which if you see this like vortex, it's getting created here. This is what I can see, so I would say for now just go ahead and send tweets if you got anything. Cool. All right. Well, then I'm gonna start going through core. So if we open up, I'll start in GitHub. This is, the master branch. So in the past, we kind of shifted some of this stuff around, but from here going forward, all mainline development on the latest and greatest kind of nightly build stuff which we're calling the edge release, is going to be on master. There'll still be feature branches, and there'll likely be branches that stay isolated for a long period of time, but the 0.10 branch and 0.9 branch shenanigans were such that we've learned our lesson, and we're going to keep it simple as we can from here on out. There's also two other important branches. One is beta, and the other is stable. And these are kept up to date with the current tagged beta release and stable release on NPM. And the only reason they're branches at all is so that Travis can automatically build them. And that's all kind of jotted down here in the contribution guide, which is in the process of getting updated, and we can come back to maybe feature requests in a little bit and how we're thinking about handling those. But let's take a 10-minute, 5-minute maybe, let's see how fast we can get through this, dive into how Sails is structured as far as its code base, and with kind of an emphasis on how you might get involved if you're looking at either monkey patching something real quick for yourself that you can't figure out how to do through a plugin, or are hoping to send a pull request. So start with the bin folder. So as you are probably used to in other projects, this is the command line interface, basically. So back in the package JSON, there is this, which is basically, if you run Sails on the command line, what's going to happen is this bin Sails.js file is going to kick off. So that's kind of your entry point. This uses Commander, TJ's little module, which is, and it's been monkey patched a little bit itself. You can see right here in this underscore Commander file. Basically, this is the core of the command line. It uses Commander syntax to set up options and usage, and then it calls the other little command line scripts from here. So if you're coming from 0.9, most of these will look familiar. Sails debug is new. Sails www is what was formerly called Sails build, and Sails run is not currently in here anymore. Totally open to talking about that, but it's just a matter of kind of priorities at the moment for me. So a big new kind of thing in here is this file, Sails generate. It's been completely redone since 0.9 to use generators. So kind of, if this is the first time you're hearing about this, it's a lot like what you would think when you think about a Yeoman generator, spitting out code files basically somewhere on your system. Maybe doing a few other things, but really the purpose is create the code files. The difference here is that Sails generators are, for one, tailored towards working within a Sails project, although they're not really limited to that. You could use it for anything. And the concept really is that there's no prompts, no interactive prompts. I mean, you can always do that, but by default, it's an extremely simple mechanism to take stuff from a templates folder, customize it, and then spit it out. So if you have a particular kind of less or Sass mixin you like, and you want to be able to generate it quickly, you could use Sails generators for that, right? And generators also have this cascading thing going on. So kind of like in Angular, if you're familiar with that, you'll see there's this scope thing, and the scope thing is basically a subset of your Sails config. And it works by, when you call the first generator, so Sails generate new is basically when you run Sails new, that calls Sails generate front end, Sails generate back end, and these the scope gets passed down just like it would in Angular and the DOM to nested scopes. And that way you can, for instance, pass in a force at the top level, and that'll cause all of the generators within to use the force option if they care about it or if they know about what that means. You can make custom generators, and actually there's some great docs on installing and using those that were done by Earl Nathan at this link, which I'll post in the chat. And if you guys can't see that, let me know. On Twitter, I think right now is probably our best way to communicate. Okay, so that's kind of the extreme crash course in generators. Back to core. So where this all gets kicked off most of the time when you run sales lift on the command line is in this file. What it's doing is either it's going to use the global sales, or it's going to check and see if it can use the local sales that you have in your project under node module sales to lift your app. And it'll do one or the other, and that's where the command line ends, right? And that's when you get into this lib folder, which is the actual sales core code. I've been kind of scattering these little readmes around like Hansel and Gretel breadcrumb sort of thing, and they may be useful, they may be not. I would love to hear feedback from you guys about how these could be more useful or whether they have been at all. I've been trying to use the Node.js stability indices, and we're just starting to kind of spread those out everywhere. We've gone through probably about a third of the hooks and labeled them. For the most part, I think these are actually quite harsh as far as the language around the way they describe the changeability of things. I think stability level 3 stable is basically never going to change without something crazy happening. I think most of Sales core is somewhere between 2 and 3 right now. The core router is much closer to 3, and for the most part the API is relatively stable, but there's likely going to be plenty of additions still at this point. So far, between 0.9 and 0.10, we've been able to maintain almost 100% backwards compatibility. There's a few changes you'll have to make, but the majority of stuff should just automatically get upgraded, at least at runtime, and you'll see a bunch of deprecation messages, but shouldn't be too bad. So, finish the rundown really quick. There's also this events.md file in here, and if you're curious about whenever you see sales.on or sales.emit getting used in core, this file can kind of help cover that. There's a number of events that we use internally, and this I think does a decent job of covering that. We have this thing called sales.after that you'll see laying around, which is kind of like jQuery, document.onReady. And that's just, with any event emitter event. So on to app. App is much like an Express app. It doesn't extend from an Express app. It's something separate. Something actually a little bit simpler, likely, because it doesn't have any capability built into it to deal with an HTTP server. What it does do is instantiates the hooks, which is that other folder you saw, and each hook represents some piece of functionality in Sales that's not absolutely crucial, right? Basically, this has been kind of true since 0.9, but very, very true since 0.10. All functionality in Sales that could be boiled out into a hook has been. And so what was left was this concept of an app, which loads hooks and understands how to bubble down configuration from environment variables and command line arguments. And then there's also a router. And the router is currently an Express router, which is a full instance of Express, which is capable of bringing forward an HTTP server, but it actually won't. And there's this private router in Sales, which will likely be replaced now that Express 4 is out, once we're through with this release. But it'll be replaced by the routification module, and potentially even the regex routing module inside of that, just with the idea of making this part of Sales as light as possible. Obviously, Express will continue to live in the HTTP hook, and Express semantics are going to be everywhere throughout core, but just like Express has broken itself into modules, it makes sense to only use the ones we absolutely need in the core. And then the idea is eventually to break these hooks, of which there's about 20 right now, out into separate modules. Much like we did with generators and the way that adapters work, just to, for one, spread the burden and give people the opportunity to override and customize to fit their needs, but also just to keep Sales core by itself as light as possible and make it quick to install. If you're not using cores in your project, you may not need to have that pre-installed. So I'm going to check Twitter again here and see if anyone has any questions. Feel free to hit me at Mike McNeil, which looks like this. or at Sails.js. And there's that, yeah, that extremely large rabbit, larger than I remembered, actually. All right, well, so far so good. I'm just going to keep talking until you guys tell me to stop, or we run out of time. So I think what might be helpful, since this has not been covered very much in any of our docs up to this point, and there's actually some that that Nick created, Uncle Tammy, on the beta site that you might want to check out. Looks like this, if you're interested in working on hooks. Under extending Sails, hooks, and some of this is rather old. This is the original proposal back from 09, actually, here, that you can get to if you're just curious about the philosophy here. But the right now, the kind of the point behind hooks, as we already talked about, but more than any of the other ways you could extend Sails, you know, it started off you could extend Waterline and therefore Sails by creating adapters, and that works great, right? You can do granted there's still improvements we can make there, of course, but it's a way for you to plug into any kind of CRUD-oriented data store, or in some cases even certain APIs. And then this concept of generators it actually came third, but it makes sense to talk about it next. That was kind of to solve the problem where people wanted to be able to generate, you know, handlebars apps out of the box, or be able to generate Nunjux or Jade or other things, many other things that probably all of us haven't heard of, or at least one of us hasn't heard of, right? Because everyone has different needs. So, you know, we're going to continue to bundle EJS, but these other these generators basically make it possible for you to control the files that get created with Sails. Or if you're always making iOS apps with the Sails backend, you might not need the assets folder and the tasks folder in the grub file, right? Maybe you don't care. So you can just run, you know, if we just try that out really quick. Sails new some test app -- no front ends. And actually, someone sent a pull request to add this to the docs recently. Thank you very much if you're online. But as you can see, you know, when I made this, there's just API, just config, and just views. And you may be thinking views is not very front ends or not very back end, and that's kind of true. But the thing is, you might actually want to put who knows what, right? Like XML in here or something, and it's server-side rendered views. So for the time being, it's in there. If someone also wanted to add a no views option, totally game. Just let me know. And there's a lot more we can do like that, which I think has not really been tapped into yet, as far as kind of controlling the default structure that gets created here. So, you know, one way to do that is to send a pull request to the generator itself, the one that Sails uses. So if we look in, you know, our Sails dependency and node modules, you can see that there's still, you know, there's our grunts, grunt tasks that are built in by default, and then there's this thing called Sails generate, and inside of that is all of these generators. So if you want to send pull requests, I think that one just kind of slipped its way in there, ignore that. If you want to send pull requests to any of these, feel free, or if it's something where you feel like it might not be a good default assumption, you can always override any of these generators, and the best place to go for that is to check out Earl's docs, because it's probably not time to go into it in too much detail here, because I want to get to hooks. Okay, so the thing with hooks was, okay, that's great. You can override the CLI now for the most part. It's pretty much do whatever you want. You can override adapters. You can integrate with just about any database you want, you know, more or less, with exceptions that we can talk about maybe next time when we can get Cody on as well. But the part that was still missing is if you wanted to change the way that Sails deals with runtime stuff, like you don't like the CSRF protection that's built in. You want something to happen differently, and you don't want to have to hack it, right? So that's what hooks let you do. And just to kind of show you a little bit about how they work, For one thing, if we can kind of cover at the same time is Sails has always had pretty simple programmatic usage. It's up until now it hasn't been very well documented. The thing that dealing with hooks makes you realize is that you kind of have to get into the load process before your normal configuration. So you have a couple options to do this. If we go back to our test project, you'll see that every Sails app now comes with this Sails.rc file. And primarily that's to configure generators, but you can also use it to configure hooks and actually any of your other config if you want. So in this Sails.rc, if I put port 4000, or let's do 1492, then if I lift, fingers crossed, we should end up on 1492, right? Another thing in 0.10 is if the grunt file gets deleted, instead of crashing with little explanation, it just says, hey, I can't find the grunt file, I'm not going to do that. And basically what that means is that it's not going to load the grunt hook. Also, if you lift in verbose mode, or now there's also silly mode, just kind of based off what NPM does for the levels there, you can see at the very beginning it loads all these hooks in order. There's even a user hooks hook, so you can add, just by adding an API/hooks folder, you can add stuff to your project that'll kind of give you a userland hook environment to develop in. That works great in many cases as either as an alternative for services, or if you want lower level functionality, maybe you need something to happen that you normally put in your Bootstrap file, but you need it to happen like right between when the ORM comes up and when the session hook gets instantiated, let's say. So you can see these running in order. You can see that lots of stuff starts happening. Each one of them loads its own config for the most part, and it has its own implicit config defaults. There's some mechanisms in the hook specification that help you with this. So there's like a defaults object you can specify. There's a configure method. There's a load modules method. There's a routes object with a before and after object inside of it, which is the after object is actually how blueprint routes work. The before object is how stuff like CSRF protection works. Before happens before all your routes in your routes.js file, and then after happens afterwards. So that's really all there is to that. And it's just another little like mini routes file in there. Yeah, so that's a really quick rundown there. So let's say that we wanted to change the hooks, right? We wanted to disable the grunt hook entirely so that we don't have to see that annoying message anymore, right? So I can do this, set hooks grunt false, and this will leave the other hooks untouched. I can also use this approach to override this hook. If I was doing this programmatically or from another JavaScript file, when I actually call Sails.lift or Sails.load, which is, there's some more information about that in those README files in core. But what's going to happen here is if I lift now, grunt will be gone, so you won't see that message. And actually, if I go into the Sails REPL, the Sails console, if I load the Sails object, you can see I've overridden the util.inspect or the inspect method on it. So there's this little, preppy little sailboat thing, and then there's kind of a rundown of your models, your controllers, and you can see now I only have 19 hooks instead of 20, and that's because grunt is gone. You can do that with all of your hooks. You probably don't want to do it with module loader and user config. That'll probably get a little bit more flexible later in the next, probably in some of the 0.10 patch releases, but for now, just kind of always assume that you're going to want module loader and user hooks, or sorry, user config. And that kind of brings me to where we were looking at the Sails core tests. So under, let's check out views. So you can see when we're loading up the views hook and just testing that it works, basically, it'll work without the session hook, but you need the HTTP hook. So we're doing, instead of hooks, we're using load hooks here. And load hooks allows you to specify in order explicitly the hooks that you want, like only these hooks, right? Instead of being able to kill certain ones. So pretty much always when you see this, the first two things you'll see are module loader and user config, because they're important. Views needs HTTP because we can't serve views without an HTTP server right now. And if you've ever tried to hit, via Socket.io or the Sails.io client, a route which serves a view no matter what, you probably saw the message. It's like, hey, that's not supported. Eventually, that can be supported, and then view stands alone. But adding that kind of turmoil with everything else we had going on in this release didn't seem like a good idea. So, and then the other thing going on here is app.load, and you'll see that a lot throughout tests. This does not lift the server on a port. It just starts up a Sails instance, and you could have thousands of these things if you want. It's not going to hurt anything. They are individual, not connected to any port, and fully functional, except you can't really talk to them via requests. There is some experimental stuff around that, but you can just let me know if you have any questions, and I can talk about that more next time. So that's like a really broad overview of core, and hopefully that was not too alienating or anything like that. So let me know, kind of, if you wouldn't mind, your feedback here, and I can either focus more on this next time. Hopefully next time we'll have kind of a more back and forth format with questions. And I'm happy to kind of alternate these, where maybe one week we focus more on contributing and core, and then another week we focus more on roadmap items and kind of what's next or what's new in 0.10. So I'd love to hear your feedback there. And if anyone has any questions on Twitter, I'll give it one last check. Otherwise, I'm going to sign off. There's Rabbit again. All right, I think we're done, guys. Thank you very much for all your support with Sails, and let me know if there's anything I can do to help.